I wanted to marry a poor man, but my mother shouted, "If you marry him, this mother will no longer exist." I burst into tears as if my voice had been ripped from my throat the moment I opened my mouth. Pain rushed to my eyes, burning, but I cried not only because of that threat. I cried because I knew at 25 I was still the daughter trapped in a family cage, tied to strings called filial piety, honor, and fear. I was Isabel, Izzy, the child my mother, Margaret, had trained to never stumble because of poverty, never look like a loser in the eyes of her relatives. And Robert, whom I used to call father tenderly, still stood still like a pillar, letting the storm named Margaret blow through the house without anyone daring to stop it. Michael entered my life, not with a halo, but with scarred hands, with a smile that smelled of afternoon sunlight, with questions as small as raindrops. Did you sleep well today? Have you had lunch yet? He didn't know how to promise with lavish visions, but he knew how to find shortcuts through my struggling days with kindness. He worked at the construction site, sometimes did extra work at the docks, and late at night he would stop by the coffee shop where I worked, sit at the table by the door, nod at me, as if to say, "I'm here." With him, I felt like a person, not a project of my mother. The day he proposed, the park was deserted by the wind. We sat on a faded wooden bench, dry leaves chasing each other on the path like the city's whispering secrets. He had no ring, nor did he kneel. His rough, slightly trembling hands rested on each other in a poor but solemn vow. "Izzy, I'm not rich," he said, "but I will stand by you." Every day I smiled, a smile I hadn't heard myself in a long time. I said yes, as if telling myself that this time I would choose. We kissed with no witness but the swaying trees, and I believed that yes was big enough to withstand any rage. But my mother was always bigger than any rage. When I admitted it, her eyes closed like two iron doors. "You will ruin your life," she said, her voice cutting through the air. I told her that Michael was kind, hard-working, had self-respect, knew how to love truly. She replied with a cold smile, "Kindness doesn't pay for electricity. Hard work doesn't buy honor." And then the words I heard in my dreams later, "If you marry him, don't call me Mom." I didn't know when my tears started, only that my knees suddenly wanted to collapse as if begging for something in vain. In the corner of the house, Robert turned his wedding ring on his finger, looking at the tile floor as if there was an answer. He didn't say, "Let me decide," nor did he say, "Don't." His silence was a voice, gradually becoming a law. I took a step back, then another. I didn't break, I compromised. I said to Michael, "Let's wait a little bit, okay?" He understood the way people who grew up with deprivation understand. Acceptance, resilience, no complaints. "I'll wait," he said simply. But I could feel the weight on his shoulders growing heavier, and I knew that every day that passed was another day I was letting my mother and her old fears decide whether I deserved my own happiness. I continued to live two lives. During the day, I was Izzy, who smiled when I met the gentleman my mother introduced me to. Straight ties, clean stories that smelled of money and education. At night, I was Izzy, holding back laughter, running to the intersection where the bakery was open late, holding Michael's hand and listening to him tell me about a misaligned beam that the whole team had to redo, about a coworker with a newborn baby, about his shoes that were about to lose their soles. "But they're still wearable," he said, then chuckled as if cutting my sadness in half, keeping one half. If it weren't for that night, I might have continued to cut myself in two and lived. That night, through the crack in my parents' bedroom door, I heard the sound of a rare argument. Robert, who had always been silent, suddenly said loudly, "Margaret, you can't build her life on a false truth." The sound of a glass clinking. My mother replied in a low voice, "She won't know. I swear she won't know." I stood there, petrified, my heart pounding as if it wanted to break out of my chest. Which truth? Which false? What in this house was real, and what was made to look real? I went up to the attic, where the smell of damp wood and old dust was like a different kind of rain. I opened each box, pulled out stacks of yellowed letters, slid my hands over the hard covers of hand-sewn photo albums, and then I saw the woman in the photo, my mother, with a softness I had never seen before, leaning her head on a stranger's shoulder. Behind the photo was a feminine handwriting, "Forever yours until the world says no." An envelope was tucked in with it, unaddressed, only the words, "I dared not send." I thought I would be brave, but I was afraid. You were poor. The future was foggy. They told me to play it safe. I chose. Please forgive me. His name appeared on another card. Thomas. I read until my eyes burned like fire. The room spun slightly. The pieces of the puzzle came back together. The fear in my mother's eyes whenever she heard the word poor. The irrational hatred of Michael. The way she tied me like a kite in the wind. I carried the stack of letters down to the kitchen. My mother sat at the table, her tea cold for a long time. I put the photo down and waited. She looked at me, her hands clenched white. "Who let you look into the past?" she asked, but her voice was no longer blunt, but hollow. "I need the present," I said. "I need to know why my life was built on threats." She snatched the photo, then stopped, as if defeated by herself. "Thomas is not for me," she said softly. "Poverty is not for me. I chose otherwise." I stood there, understanding with frightening speed. Perhaps I was the result of a love left by the wayside. And perhaps I was the mirror of the past that my mother did not dare to look at. I wanted to run to Michael and say, "Let's go." Away from the city, away from home, away from voices that didn't bear our names. But the fear that had been nurtured in me since childhood still sat firmly, like a stubborn old woman on a wooden chair. Wait. Maybe Mom will change her mind. I waited. Life didn't change its mind. One rainy morning, the scaffolding at the construction site where Michael worked collapsed like a curt statement of fate. I heard the news an hour late, arrived at the hospital 2 hours late, arrived at the funeral home 3 hours late. I stood before the coffin that shone like a block of ice or like a frozen yes, and I couldn't say my name in front of his family. My love was a secret, and secrets don't have chairs at funerals. I stood, still, learning to let the tears flow inside me. After the funeral, I returned home like an empty warehouse. "You'll thank me later," my mother said. I looked at her and saw someone who had given up so much for false security, mistaking security for love. Robert paced back and forth, not speaking. That night I sat by the window, the neighbor's tin roof catching the rain, the sound steady as a heartbeat. In the dark room, my pain shattered into pieces small enough to fit in every cabinet, every drawer in the house. I pulled out a notebook and began writing down the names of everyone I loved, of everything I had chosen to keep silent. I wrote Michael first, then myself. The next day, I called Jacob, a distant cousin I had only met a couple of times. I asked, "What is it about Mom that people don't talk about in our family?" There was a silence on the other end. Then Jacob said, as if to unload something that had been stuck in his throat for years, "There was a man named Thomas." That answer pushed me out of the house, out into the rain, on a journey I didn't know where it would end. I found the old apartment with Thomas's name on the mailbox. The new owner opened the door and pointed to the wall with the nail marks of a large photograph. A man standing on the riverbank, eyes squinting in the wind, a crooked smile. I didn't have time to ask more, only knowing that absence had a shape.
In the evening, in the kitchen, I told my mother that I knew. I talked about the park, about the missing ring, about the abandoned yes, about the collapsed scaffolding, about the yellowed envelope. "Am I the remnant of a love you buried?" I asked her. My mother gasped like someone who had just surfaced from a long dive. "Don't use the word love to describe something that once made people hungry," she said, looking through me. "I chose not to let you go hungry." I nodded, but also shook inside, because I understood there were other hungers. Hunger for truth, hunger for the right to say the name of my life, hunger for being loved without the threat of losing my mother. I began to pick up the torn pieces of Izzy. I rummaged through letters, called some old relatives, listened to the scattered stories. A girl named Margaret who used to sing. A boy named Thomas who liked to read by the river. A sudden move, a hasty wedding to Robert, a child born earlier than expected. Each story was like a piece of stained glass, fitting together into a new window for me to see my life without my mother's eyes reflecting it. I didn't know how many more people I was about to break by touching this truth, but I knew that if I didn't touch it, I would wither away in a roll. The third night after Michael's funeral, I dreamed of him sitting at a table by the window of a cafe, holding a hot paper cup, smiling at me. Don't wait. I woke up, turned on the light, and looked at my face in the mirror. I looked like a young Margaret, my lips pursed as if I had swallowed a lifetime of lies. I took a pen and drew a line on the page. On this side was what my mother said. On the other side was what I saw, heard, and touched. For the first time, I wasn't asking what would my mother think, but what do I want? And I wanted the truth. Though it was as bitter as salt water, I wanted to know who Thomas was in my mother's story and in my blood. I wanted to know why my mother hated Michael like a childhood disease. I wanted to know who Robert was beyond the gentle man who chose love over pride. I wanted to know why I grew up with the same fear as the woman who raised me. I wanted to know who the words, "If you marry him, don't call me mom," really defined, me or her. The sun rose through the curtains, a thin blade of light cutting through the room. I heard my mother's footsteps in the hallway, the sound of spoons hitting cups. I stood up, feeling as if I were about to go to the execution ground. But perhaps it was just a kitchen, a table, two women, one who had run all her life, one who had just learned to stop. I opened the door, walked in, and knew that from now on, I would not wait for someone to give me a life. I would demand it myself. I had begun my journey to find the truth, and it was like stepping down a bottomless well. I knew I could not return after opening this door, but fear no longer had the power to bind me. After Michael died, I felt I had nothing to lose, and in that naked void, I found courage. I followed the fragments of conversation whispered by relatives. An old aunt mentioned Thomas with a half-lidded look, then fell silent as if she had let it slip. A drunken uncle muttered that Margaret once abandoned a poor boy to choose the safe road. The fragments were like stained glass, not fitting together but sparkling with a hidden truth. I wanted to piece them together, even though the picture that emerged might crack my heart again. I began to search for traces of Thomas. The old apartment with his name on the mailbox was now owned by someone else. The new owner pointed to a patch of stained wall and said a large photograph had hung there. I saw a shadow in my imagination, a man standing by the river, eyes squinting against the wind, a crooked smile as if resisting fate. I didn't have time to ask more, only that absence had a shape. Then, as if fate had thrown another piece of the puzzle into my hands, the phone rang. A strange but familiar male voice rang out from somewhere. "Are you Isabel?" I froze. He introduced himself as Jacob, Thomas's son, my half-brother. My heart was pounding like a drum.
I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or hang up. We met in a small cafe by the river. He was a few years older than me, and his face bore an uncanny resemblance to mine. A slightly pointed jawline, and his eyes crinkled like crescent moons when he smiled. He told me that Thomas had spent his life talking about a woman named Margaret and the daughter he had never met. He never lost hope, Jacob said, his voice trembling, until the last day. I looked at him and saw in his eyes not only the truth, but also the loss he had left us both. I returned home, a storm in my wake. I faced my mother again. I know about Thomas, I said. She paused, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. Who told you? She snapped. I didn't answer, just handed her a photo Jacob had given me, a photo of Thomas holding a baby boy, smiling softly, as if he had a piece of his heart missing in his hand. He is your biological father, right? I asked. Mother's eyes glistened with tears, but she still forced herself. Thomas is not for me. Poverty is not for me. I chose Robert so you can have a better life, Dot. I laughed, a hollow laugh. A better life? I lost Michael. I lost the person I loved because of your fear. And now I know I lost the truth about myself. Mom slapped me. It didn't hurt like the last time. It was just a full stop. I didn't cry or back away. I looked straight at her. I won't be silent anymore. From that day on, I began to share my story. At first, only to a few relatives, then more and more to the neighbors who once admired my family. I talked about Thomas, about how Margaret had buried the truth, and like a rotten brick wall, if the slightest crack appeared, everything began to crumble. The whispers spread everywhere. The image my mother had built up over the years was shattered into pieces. Robert knew. I don't know if he heard it from someone or if it was his mother's own desperate confession. One evening, he came into my room, his eyes red. Izzy, is it true? He asked, his voice trembling. I bit my lip until it bled. I said nothing, just put the old letters in his hands. He read them, his face pale. Then he staggered out of the room like a disoriented ghost. The next morning, he was gone. My mother sat at the kitchen table, her hair disheveled and her eyes puffy. But she tried to keep her voice firm. He'll be back. I looked at her, and for a moment I saw her as a cracked statue, trying to maintain her dignity while feeling hollow inside. But the tragedy didn't end there. One afternoon, Jacob called me. Izzy, he said, his voice heavy, there's something else you need to know. I've been hesitant to tell you, but keeping it a secret will only make things worse. We met at the old coffee shop. Jacob placed a file on the table, his hand shaking. I opened it. Before me were birth certificates, letters, and other pieces of evidence. The words under father made my blood freeze. Vincent, not Thomas. Not Robert. Another name, unfamiliar, but it sent a chill down my spine. Jacob looked at me, his eyes filled with tears. Thomas loved your mother very much, but he wasn't your real father. Isabel, your real father is Vincent, and he's still alive. The room spun around me. I couldn't breathe. Everything I believed in was falling apart. Michael was dead. Thomas wasn't my father. Robert was just my foster father. And now the name Vincent appeared like a monster from the darkness. I asked Jacob, "Who is he?" Jacob clenched his fists. "A dangerous man. Your mother ran away from him to save herself. And to save you." I came home with a file heavy as a rock in my pocket. I threw it on the table in front of my mother. She saw it and turned pale. "Who gave this to you?" she whispered. "It doesn't matter," I said, my voice hard. "What matters is it true? Vincent is your biological father." Mother collapsed into a chair, her shoulders shaking. "Yes," she admitted, tears falling like surrender. "He was a mistake. A ghost. I ran my whole life to escape him." I looked at her, angry and confused. In her, I saw a liar who had ruined my youth, but I also saw a woman so scared she had sold her heart to survive. And I stood in the middle, both victim and beneficiary. I packed my things. I couldn't stay in this house full of lies another day. Mom grabbed my hand and cried, "Don't go, Izzy. You'll regret it." I took her hand off me. "I've regretted enough." I left the house, Margaret sobbing. Robert had not returned. The house, with all its oppressive memories, slowly receded behind me. I did not know where I was going. I did not know who I was becoming. But I knew one thing: this cycle of lies would end for me. But little did I know, when I thought I had freed myself, the ghost named Vincent had started to move towards me. I thought that when I walked out of Margaret's house, I would leave all the lies, the pain, and the betrayal behind. But the truth never stays still. It was like a winter wind that seeped through every crack in the door, touching cold skin. And the name Vincent, a man I had never met but whose blood was mine, became a shadow that haunted my sleep. My first days were spent in a small apartment on the edge of town. The walls were patchy. The drafty windows whistled like whispers. I began to write. About Michael, about Thomas, about Robert, about Margaret, and about Jacob, the unexpected brother who had led me to the end of the truth. I wrote to keep from going crazy. I wrote as if each word could ward off the lurking darkness. Then one evening, when I returned to the apartment, there was an old cardboard box by the door. I opened it. Inside was a worn, threadbare teddy bear with a poor stitching. I was stunned. It was the toy I had hugged to sleep with as a child, long lost. Underneath was a piece of paper, scrawled with the words, "Dad is looking for you." I threw the box to the ground, my whole body shaking. He knew who I was. He knew where I was. And more importantly, he called himself Dad. I didn't know what to do but call Jacob. My voice was shaking. You think Vincent is looking for me?" Jacob was silent for a long time, then replied, "I always thought this day would come. Izzy, he's not the type to give up. But you're not the child he threatened anymore. You're an adult. You have the right to decide." I sat in the night looking at the teddy bear on the floor. My heart was filled with fear and anger. How could someone like Vincent come into my life, destroy my mother's childhood, and now come back to claim fatherhood? A few days later, I got a strange call. I heard heavy breathing on the other end, then a deep, hoarse voice, each word slowly. "Isabel." I froze. No one called me by my full name anymore. "It's Dad. He wants to see you." I gripped the phone tightly, my hands sweating. 1,000 screams rang in my head. I wanted to hang up, to run. But then I remembered Michael, remembered Robert, the foster father, who had chosen to love me unconditionally, and remembered myself, who had been silent too many times. I said, my voice hoarse, "I will choose the place and the time. And you must come alone." We met at a crowded breakfast place where the clatter of knives and forks and voices could mask any threat. I walked in, my heart racing. There he was, Vincent. Older than I'd expected, with patchy gray hair and wrinkled skin. But the eyes hadn't aged at all. They were the eyes of a man used to controlling things, of a man who believed everything belonged to him. He smiled when he saw me. "You look like me," he said, as if handing me a sentence. I didn't answer. I placed a newspaper on the table, the middle page boldly printed with the article I had just published, my life story, the truth I had made public. "This is my story," I said slowly, "not yours." His face fell. "You are defaming me." I looked him straight in the eye. "I tell the truth, and the truth needs no defense." I told him about the lawyer I'd met, about the protective order I was preparing, about how any threats would be documented. He snorted, smirked. But when he stood up, I saw his steps were heavier. The power of the past no longer exempted the present. I stepped out of the cafe and took a deep breath. At the end of the street, Robert stood there, holding a bag of warm croissants. He said nothing, just held them out to me. I smiled, a smile I hadn't felt in a long time that belonged to me. He wasn't my real father, but he chose to stay. And sometimes, chosen love is stronger than blood. That night, Margaret called me. Her voice was hoarse. "Are you okay?" I hesitated, then said, "I'm fine." There was a long pause, and then she said, "I'm sorry." I closed my eyes. That apology couldn't erase the lost years, couldn't give Michael back, couldn't mend the wounds. But it was the first brick of a bridge, however small. "I don't forgive you," I said, "but I hear you." I continued to write, not to take revenge on Margaret, not to defame Vincent, but to reclaim my own voice. I wrote to Michael as a tribute to the briefest and truest love of my life. I wrote to Robert to record the silent sacrifice of a man who chose to love a child not his own. I wrote to myself to remind myself that the truth may hurt, but only it can set me free. One morning, I returned to the park where Michael had proposed to me. Children were swinging on the swings and laughter filled the air. I laid a daisy on the grass, not to say goodbye, but to promise to live the rest of my life with kindness. I looked up and saw the blue sky. For the first time in a long time, I felt free, a freedom that no one could ever take away. If you've heard this, you probably know. Revenge never heals. Only the truth, however bitter, sets us free. I've learned to stop being afraid, to stop letting threats define me. And I hope you, wherever you are, whatever you're going through, can find the courage to tell your story. Please like, share, and subscribe if this story touches you, and leave a comment. If it were you, what would you do when the truth about your family was revealed like that? I will read every word because I believe every story is worth listening to.